kindred friends, and welcome to the Radical Emergence podcast, where we're having conversations at the edge of transformation. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Jen Pierre-Rich, and with me is my friend, co-host, and co-collaborator, Dr. Sally Adnams Jones. Please check out our bios in the show notes, where you'll find links to our work, websites, and can find ways to connect with us. If you're not already following, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and join our mailing list so you can stay up to date on new episodes as they drop.
Hello, everybody. Sally here. This exciting project consists of about 26 episodes in all, dedicated to better defining and understanding transformation on all its levels of reality. That's personal, social, as well as ecological. We're going to ask, what is transformation? Why bother? Why do we need it? And what does it feel like or look like? We'll also ask, can we induce it or perhaps accidentally block it? These are really important questions for growth.
We draw not only on our hard-won life experience, we are also transdisciplinarians. So what the heck is that? Well, it means we want to understand transformation from as many lenses as possible, including formal academic disciplines and discourses, art, media, and popular culture. Importantly, we draw from our living experience.
So we are experts, so to speak, but mostly in just one small but highly critical area, our own suffering, and the medicines that we've both used to transform our own lives. So to this end, we've also added decades of committed practices, as well as formal degrees, including specific in-depth studies in the mechanisms of transformation, because we needed to understand this healing journey for ourselves.
Does this entitle us to help others? You bet. Absolutely. Because it is by sharing our stories, knowledge, and direct experience that we offer sane, sober, practical tools for living on the ground of life. So welcome. Strap in, hang on, and enjoy the ride as we deep dive into a universe of transformation. It's so good to be back with you again on the Radical Emergence podcast. I'm Dr. Jen Pierre-Rich, and with me is my dear friend, co-host, and co-collaborator, Dr. Sally Adnams Jones. Hi, Sally.
Hi, Jen. What a pleasure to be back.
It's so great. I love doing this show with you. It is truly one of the great blessings of my life to be your friend and partner in this transformation journey. A friend of the show recently called us the Transformation Mavens, so we are going to leap into that role with great gusto. It's hard to believe that we already reached episode 20, and there are only 6 more episodes to go. And then we're going to record some bonus content, which we think you're going to really enjoy. We're really excited about it. And as we enter this late season of our project, one thing we want to do is make sure that the container we created about transformation is really robust and well-rounded. And so a container of that magnitude really demands that we discuss ethics, values, and moral frameworks as part of our exploration into this world of transformation. In fact, Sally and I would say that this show itself is an expression of our values and our ethic of care. And that's really cool because this is our values in action. So conscious transformation really requires us to be aware and intentional about the ethical and value-based and moral constructs and the frameworks that we live by. Because we are interested in participating with transformation in meaningful, generative ways. And a big part of that includes becoming aware of and repairing, often learning and unlearning the frameworks and constructs that govern our lives. And these frameworks and constructs are very important, but many of us may not even be paying attention to them. And the more we can identify our ethical frameworks and moral constructs and work with them consciously, the more we are able to move with transformation in really dynamic ways that encourage growth and healing and integration, which is what we are all about. So the more we identify our values, the more clearly and effectively our voices echo out into the world, and the more our work on the ground of life has real impact and sustainability. So we are all super hungry for meaning in our lives. We recorded an entire episode about this, about finding opportunities for creating meaning in what's known as the meaning crisis. So please go back and take a look at episode 15. If you missed it, it's a really important part of this entire container that we have created about transformation. So what we're doing now is we're reimagining meaning in very powerful ways on our own terms and really digging deep to find out for ourselves what is meaningful on all levels, personal, social, and ecological. What do we value? What is our moral code? What are the ethics that are important to us? And then the question becomes, how do we cultivate this ethic of care that could serve as an answer to addressing our many systems crisis? So that's what we're going to talk about on today's show. And it's really good to have you here with us. I want to start quickly by defining what are morals, what are ethics, and what are values. So let's talk about values first. So the values we hold can be personal, cultural values, or social values. They are the causes and the conditions that we consider very important and worthy in life. Our values are the principles, really, that guide our behavior and our beliefs. In contrast, ethics are the guidelines for our behavior in society and in groups. So ethics are the principles of conduct that we believe are important in the world. And often there's general agreement about issues of ethics, right? So like issues of justice and uprooting injustice and fairness and equality. Most of us share those as shared ethics. And in simple terms, morals are the things we think are right and wrong. They're the standards we live our lives by. So, and it's important as we're looking at those different definitions to recognize that they often overlap, and that they often change over time as we mature and develop into adults. The standards that we live by often shift to reflect our development and our growth. And one of the common shifts that you hear us talking about on this podcast a lot is the shift from the egocentric individual to the eco-centric, interconnected oneness. That's the big shift that we're working towards and that we believe has real healing potential for us as a species. So some of our values remain consistent throughout all of our lives, like justice for all human beings has been a guiding principle throughout my life. That belief has never wavered for me. But alongside that belief, I've also, as I've grown and developed a commitment for justice for all animals, not just human animals. So I strive to avoid contributing to the suffering of animals caused by the animal industrial complex, where the animals' lives have no value except for just as livestock and as commodities. So my decision not to contribute to their suffering affects their lives. It affects the lives of the animals that are caught up in that cycle of suffering. I'm one less human contributing to that suffering. So this is an example of how my ethics and values can be stable in one way, as in equality and fairness, and the rights of all people, but to now include animals, as I've grown and changed and developed over time. So I'm going to stop there and I'm going to pass it to Sally. And I can't wait to deep dive with you into this conversation on this really important topic and how our values are influencing our journey of transformation. Over to you, Sally.
Thanks, Jen. And I think it was such a great opening for all of us, including our listeners, to discern the difference between morality and ethics, because they're very closely related, as is empathy. So I'd like to respond to your beautiful opening by also suggesting that we put episode 20 after episode 19 on purpose. And episode 19 was about multiple intelligences. So we're focusing this episode 20 on a couple of those lines of intelligence, which is the interpersonal, which is empathy, the social connections, and ethics and morality, which is a line of intelligence that's been identified as one of the between 9 and 24 intelligences that we can cultivate if we want to be a well-developed human. So as we said last week, we consider ourselves to be the most intelligent species of animal on the planet. And we looked at IQ as one of those metrics, as opposed to EQ, which is the empathy line of intelligence. So this week we're bringing these sort of more into contrast. How can we be the most intelligent species cognitively, and yet the evolutionary biologists indicate in their research that we're also one of the most violent and unethical? Like, this is really important to come to grips with, because it's never mentioned. When we put ourselves in the center of the universe, as we do, anthropomorphizing ourselves at the center, Jen and I are decentering that concept. We never mention, oh, we're also 6 times more likely to kill our own species members than other mammals. We have to come to grips with this. So Jose Maria Gomez, you can Google that study, looked at 1,000 species of animals. It's central to us understanding what it means to be a human in this day and age. And he came up with definitive answers that meerkats, weirdly, are the most violent creature on the planet. 1 in 5 meerkats will be killed by other meerkats. And then it's the primates. The top violent animal would be meerkats, and then the number 2 to 6 are primates, and that includes us. So we are clearly amongst the most violent mammals on the planet. So we have to learn empathy. So that's why we're talking about this line of intelligence and developing an ethic. That is the social, the SQ that we spoke about last week. SQ would be, how do we get along as a group? And we're developing that. We're very low in SQ, as we've seen with all the wars that keep breaking out at the moment. We don't tend to do infanticide like some creatures. We tend to kill other adults with very cold aggression, with very little conscience. So we need to come to grips with this if we, in fact, are supposed to steward the planet, as Jen and I suggest. So Some people, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, have said that we're naturally peaceful, but we're corrupted by society. Maybe. Other people, like Thomas Hobbes, have said, no, actually, we are naturally violent as an ape, and society civilizes us. And Jen and I, throughout this podcast, have brought the Yin Yang symbol and as a metaphor, because we truly believe in the paradox, the pair of ducks. We are both. We are both violent, as well as probably the one animal on the planet that has developed social support programs on purpose, because we care about our suffering kinfolk. And we're developing that particular line of intelligence as we civilize ourselves. So, just looking at what humans are capable of, I'd like to talk about this difference between high IQ and low EQ and how dangerous that is. We can look at examples like the Nazi surgeons, who by day were able to practice eugenics and kill their fellow animals with no conscience. Oh, I'm so sorry. Please just cut this off, Jan, a minute. Okay, I'm going to start again. Okay. We would look at the Nazi surgeons as an example of high IQ who were able to perform surgeries that were experimental without conscience or care for the sentience of the subjects. And by night, they were totally sentimental with their opera going. They would fall into this idea of the perfect human and be very deeply touched by aesthetic and return to the gas chambers the next day. So we have this ability as humans to split. And I want to say that this is not entirely bad. This is why Jen and I talk about paradox. If you think of a normal surgeon, not a Nazi surgeon, a normal surgeon is required to temporarily repress their emotions and perform cold surgery without falling into feelings in order to save lives, not in order to brutalize people or do experiments on them. So that same facility, high IQ, can help us with our society building. So it's how we use our high IQ. How do we apply it to civilization? And one of the ways we defined intelligence last week was the ability to cohere information and apply it selectively to the context. So this is where the difficulty between high IQ and low EQ comes in. How do we apply our IQ to society to benefit all? That is the ultimate question. There's no doubt that cognitively we're the most intelligent species on Earth, but we're also coldly aggressive. So Jen and I have made this a central episode for transformation, because it's when we bring mind and body together that we actually transform. Empathy is our next level of development, because Jen and I have been teaching throughout these episodes that consciousness is learning how to become relational. This is the next level. And I would just like to, first of all, thank all the beautiful medical people out there who know how to separate IQ and EQ temporarily, because it's life-saving, as are all the jobs. For example, first responders, people who are firefighters, they're able to suppress their EQ and their empathy in order to do a job. And sometimes that leads to PTSD and a lot of trauma. So we have to be very careful, because repression of empathy can be very damaging, not only to ourselves, but to our species. So Jane Goodall, who's one of my goddesses, I'd like to end my little section here with a quote from her, who did work her entire life with primates and witnessed how chimpanzees go on organized raids, killing each other. And they're our closest relatives. And she was in love with them, all of them, and understood them so well. But she was also worried about how science and studying other subjects has turned us into a cold species. And this is what she had to say. I was told I had to give my subjects numbers, not names, because you have to be objective as a scientist, and you mustn't empathize with your subjects. And I feel this is where science has gone wrong, to have this coldness, this lack of empathy. And it has enabled us to do unethical behaviors. Moreover, why deny a perfectly respectable tool such as empathy? It gives you a groundwork for asking questions. It's really important. And only when our clever brain and our human heart work together in harmony can we achieve our true potential. So that's why Jen and I are including this in a podcast about transformation. It's the uniting of our brilliant mind with a heart that needs to be warm and have an ethic of care. Back to you, Jen.
Oh, beautiful. I'm so glad our goddess Jane is here with us on the show. And truly, she is a leader in developing and sharing this ethic of care. Yeah, powerful. I love, and I have real awe for people who professionals who have that capacity for compartmentalizing what they're experiencing, but can do it in healthy ways. Because like you said, if you don't do it in healthy ways, it can really lead to some serious autoimmune, PTSD, all kinds of issues. The research is very clear that repression leads to some very serious illnesses. But I am really in awe of people who can have that compartmentalization capacity. I seem to have not been born with too much of that capacity for compartmentalization, but I am in awe of it. And I also appreciate, Sally, how you're pointing us to our capacity for violence for all of us as a species, right? We're not trying to say, oh, those people are bad over there because they can be violent. No, all of us. We are a species that has a propensity for violence. And if we can start here as just an acceptance that this is true, then we can work from there, developing this ethic of care and being intentional about it. As you've said, I just love hearing you talk, Sally. I can listen to you for hours, and I know everybody listening loves to hear you share your wisdom. In this section, I want to talk about some of the various traditions, religious traditions, spiritual traditions, and their ethical codes. And it's likely that many of you listening are familiar with or even align with one or more of these traditions. So I think this is really interesting as we look at what it is to develop our values and ethical codes. So we were talking to a friend of the show, Jordan Gruber, and he suggested that we check out Jainism. And the Jains really are a beautiful ancient Indian religion where we find the 5 great vows. And those are nonviolence, truth, celibacy, not stealing, and non-attachment. Similarly, in Buddhism, there's the Noble Eightfold Path, which includes right understanding, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, and right thought. And in Buddhism, there's also commitments towards like nonviolence and the desire to relieve suffering and having compassion and empathy. For our Hindu brothers and sisters, one way that ethical principles are expressed is through the concept of dharma. And dharma includes our moral obligations, a sense of our duties in life, what's righteous that we care about, what rights, laws, and virtues guide our lives. And that's a really beautiful expression of ethics. For the Sikhs, these principles of ethics are lived through being in service to others and being truthful and selfless and striving for equality. In Christianity, our beloved brother Jesus shared many beautiful principles like love for our neighbors and forgiveness and compassion. We all know the 10 Commandments, which tells us to not steal, not kill, and to honor our mother and father. In Judaism, there are ethical principles outlined in the Torah that echo Christianity in the call to honor our parents, to not commit adultery or covet the possessions of others. In Islam, the principles of right action are outlined in the Quran, and they talk about respecting others and mercy, justice, honesty, and the pursuit of knowledge. And then on top of these religious and spiritual traditions, there are philosophical traditions like Stoicism and Confucianism. And they also stress ethical positions. So like in Stoicism, there are principles that are aimed at basically creating inner tranquility and striving for a virtuous life through cultivating wisdom and sound judgment, through cultivating courage by facing our challenges with bravery, and justice, and temperance, which is exercising self-control, or we might say self-regulating or moderating ourselves. So what's interesting as we look at all of these different traditions and philosophies is that there are common threads between them. And so we see compassion and empathy and kindness and what is known as the golden rule, which many of you know, that we have to treat people the way we want to be treated. So to be an ethical, moral person with strong values, we don't have to align with any one of these. I don't have any particular religious affiliation myself or spiritual belief system that I'm deeply attached to, but I'm a very ethical person. My values guide my life. They're really important to me, and I live according to them. And they're derived from a deep understanding of what is important, what has meaning, as I mentioned in the beginning of the show. And this is the task that we all have before us. Clarifying what is important. What do we consider to have value in this world? What's wrong with the world and how can we fix it? What's right with the world and how can we add to that rightness? So I think we all have a responsibility. Sally and I would say that we all have a responsibility to cultivate our sense of ethics, values, and morals. And we can follow what we've been taught and what we've been told, or maybe we need to let go of what we've been taught and what we've been told. We can base our values on what we believe, or maybe we're going through a process of unlearning what we're supposed to believe, so we can come up with a framework that feels more authentic and true to who we are. Because at the end of the day, we all have to live our lives according to the principles that feel right to us. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about developing this ethic of care and why it's really important and critical to our future on this planet. But for right now, I'm going to toss it back to you, Sally, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, Jen, this is so critical that you brought into the conversation the cross-cultural values. So historically, those were developed as religions. We call that the pre-modern epoch. And they came with sacred books that could guide whole ethnicities and cultures about those values. That attempt to civilize the violent ape. And that was the job of religion. So then what do we do when we understand that religion was also used to justify violence? There were the Crusades, with Christians going into Muslim countries and raiding, organized raids, just like chimpanzees, but fueled by ideology. This was not about food or resources. This was about being right, killing people as zealots. There was the burning of women for knowing their medicine, funeral pyres for them. There was things like the Spanish Inquisition, where religion justified torture, the most horrific tortures you can imagine. The Catholic Church would flay people alive, and in order to convert them. This is bizarre behavior. There's jihad. We're seeing what's happening right now in the Middle East, when religion is often used to justify ethnic claims to land. So this is historically an ancient thing we resort to. We can even twist our religious principles to justify the fact that we're territorial. So humans are social animals, and they're territorial. And you would think that if we're social animals, this would develop our SQ and our EQ. The EQ being how we notice what our feelings are and don't necessarily respond to the triggers. We master our interior. And SQ is how do we get along with other people, the social quotient, the line of intelligence. So that's interpersonal, and the EQ is intrapersonal. We manage our nervous systems. You would think that being social animals, we would just be born with this, but no, we have to develop it. This is not actually yet innate in human culture. We are actually stressed and traumatized by being social animals. And we try to hoard resources, and we create situations where we will kill others to protect our resources, our land, our children, because we still see ourselves as separate from other ethnicities. So this is where the development of the ethic of care moves from an ego-centric and an ethnocentric to a global-centric and even cosmocentric level of care, where we begin to see on those pictures on the TV right now that those children are no different from my children. And we begin to understand that everybody is sentient, even the livestock in the field, they're sentient. And our ethic of care becomes more than about the alleviation of suffering, as opposed to me hoarding my resources. The level of consciousness changes. So just to say that we are brilliant and we're violent, and when we dissociate from certain lines of intelligence, the EQs and the SQs, which we tend to do to justify any position we want to take, we have to remember that this is the way that narcissism is created and sociopathy. So for a while, religion kind of helped us with a code of ethics, the 10 Commandments, whatever our religion gave us as structures. Then we started developing law and order as we moved into modernity from pre-modernity, and that helped. We had some basis to fall back onto to judge what was right or wrong. Then we developed philosophies and we started debating ethics, and this became much more finely tuned, that we could start developing an understanding of right and wrong that includes pain and pleasure, and that everybody needs to be supported. How do we manage this? But then post-modernity came along, and we started realizing there's not one right and wrong. And this is critical now to our understanding of ethics. We fell into a kind of relativism. We kind of started believing, well, whatever I think is right, then it must be right, as opposed to understanding there still are universal values. It's not just my value, it's both. It's what value can I bring to the table, and what values benefit the whole as opposed to just me and my resources. So relativism is a bit of a trap that we're living in right now, this era that, and it's definitely helping facilitate narcissism, and which is very dangerous. If we all think we're able to develop our own ethic and everybody must fall into line, that's not going to work as a collective. That's not relational. So that's where we're kind of stuck right now, in a post-modernity where we're saying, I threw religion out. I'm going to use law and order to benefit me. We see that in horrific divorce cases or whatever. So we're just going to use the law. We don't actually believe in an ethics of care. It's every man for themselves. We could fall into the philosophy trap and become over-conceptual about what is right and wrong and just live in our heads and not have an open heart. We can fall into postmodern thinking that it's all just relative and we don't really care. Jen and I are producing this podcast as metamodern, which means we have to start reconstructing, not just deconstructing, and really emphasize that the future of our civilization depends on us noticing that there are universal values that we all need to buy into. And I will look more into that in my next session. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Jen. Great, thanks.
Yes, I love this, that we're returning to this awareness that there are things that are important and that it's okay to stand for our values. And I'm with you in the frustration of that kind of endless relativism that just is refusing to take any kind of responsibility or any kind of position. And I'm glad we're moving away from that. And I also want to say, what's up with meerkats? Because meerkats have lost their mind. I wonder if there's meerkats doing podcast about transformation, trauma-informed meerkats. I don't know, but these meerkats need an intervention as much as we primates do. Thank you for bringing that to our awareness. Yeah. So let's talk about developing this ethic of care and why Sally and I keep on impressing over and over that it is essential for our long-term survival as a species and the survival of other species on this planet. So in the 1980s, philosopher and psychologist Carol Gilligan popularized this term ethic of care to describe an ethical framework that is prioritizing our relations, our relationships, prioritizing empathy and our connections and interconnections. So developing this ethic of care involves centering the concern for others in our decision making. It centers understanding and responding to the needs of both individuals and communities, human and non-human, so that we can foster a sense of responsibility to each other and interconnectedness with all sentient beings. So we're stressing again and again on this podcast the real vital importance of recognizing this interconnectedness with each other and with our earth home, because we're moving away from this lie of separation. the illusion that we are alienated from each other and from our earth home, because truly nothing can be further from the truth. Our lives are so deeply interconnected with each other, with our earth home, with our animal, insect, bird and plant kinfolk. We are so deeply interconnected. And yet at the same time, we are also individuals. So this is again another one of those paradox, the paradox. We are both individuals and interconnected at the same time. We don't need to give one up for the other. We are dynamic and big enough to hold all of it. So this shift away from toxic individuality and coming into this new era of cultivating sane, reciprocal, sustainable relationships and practices that make sense to us individually and collectively. So it's about identifying what we hold true, what do we hold valuable, and promoting it as an essential part of our own ethic of care, because we believe that is how real transformation takes place, right? It starts from within each and every one of us, and then it expands outward into our world. And so fostering that deep ethic of care for each other and our earth home, that's what encourages us to make choices each and every day that contribute to the well-being of all, which reduces the risk of ecological disasters and harms. Because when we know our values and we know what our ethics are, then we move in the direction of transformation. We move with it in the direction of healing rather than causing harm. And that is my deep hope. I know that's Sally's deep hope, and we trust that is your deep hope too. We're so grateful to walk alongside you, not only in this time of crisis, but also a time of deep opportunity to reimagine a kinder, saner world that works for all beings. I am going to leave you here, and I leave you in peace. I wish you well for the week ahead. Please let us know if you have questions about this episode. We always love hearing from you. Back to you, my beloved Sally.
Thanks, Jen. I think because we've covered such a lot, I'm going to try and simplify what we've spoken about, which is really rich, and it's spanned cultures, sacred traditions, philosophies. And as Apple just rated us 5 out of 5, which I'm so proud about, they also noticed, which was Jen and my mandate, that we want to make this accessible information because we've digested so much and we want to make sure that you have takeaways. So just want to do a little recap. Last week we spoke about all these intelligences that could be boiled down to 4: IQ, EQ, SQ, and AQ, which is resilience and adversity, and how we need to be balanced. And we need to develop all those lines of intelligence. So IQ would be the bio. We're going to look at how this is bio, psycho, social, eco as well. These 4. The IQ is the biology of the brain. EQ is the interior, the psycho. SQ is the cultural and sociological quadrant. And the AQ is how resilient are we as a community? That's the 4th quadrant of the eco, or as Ken Wilber does his 4 quadrants. We've spoken about Ken Wilber's. These overlay beautifully. So we're really simplifying all this information to this beautiful map: IQ, EQ, SQ, and AQ, which you can Google, and perhaps you should, because this is critical to development. This is developmental, transformative information. It also happens to overlap with Wilber's 4 quadrants for our integral friends. You can Google that. It fits beautifully. Biopsychosocial and ecological awareness of how we need to transform. So we've been speaking about empathy, which is the sociological cultural caring for our communities and developing that. And what we do about this now that we've thrown our structures out of the window. So I'm going to just give a couple of simple ways that we can be guided in developing EQ or empathy. And for example, I spoke to some of the young people in my life, my son, for example, who grew up, as lots of young people do now, in a household that didn't push any particular religion, that did push ethics of care and conscience, developing conscience and morality, but was not steeped in a particular tradition and was fairly liberal and encouraged inquiry in all fields. Go find what moves you. So that's probably a very typical neoliberal education. And so I asked my son, who's not a practicing Christian, how do you guide your life now that you're raising your own family? And how do you know right from wrong? And he said, I've been thinking about that. And for me, it's, should I be doing anything in secret? Then I shouldn't be doing it. So for him, his guiding general principle is, if I can't be transparent, there's something dodgy about it. It's a pretty good way to guide one's life in a post-religious world. And of course, there's a difference between secrecy and privacy. You can do things in private. That's different from being secret. So I thought, that's awesome. Young people can move out of the relativism and really develop an ethics of care without resorting to the old texts. That's interesting to me as a mother and as a therapist. Jen and I, throughout this podcast, have been talking about yin and yang and how modernity and patriarchy developed yang as a value. Put it simply, Jen and I have been saying the whole time, we need to restore balance as an ethic. All the values of yin need to be reintegrated. That's another simple way of thinking, how do I guide my life? So the principles of yin are the EQ, SQ, and ecology principles, learning from nature, learning from indigenous wisdom. So balancing modernity with the values of yin, that's another way to guide our lives. We've got some simple takeaways here. In a way, we could say, to develop an ethic of care, my life needs to be guided with things that are pro-life. But even that's tricky. So that starts wars about things like abortion. So what do we mean by pro-life? That's another whole episode that we're not going to touch. Because this requires discernment. It's about the benefit of the whole. And as Jen and I have been speaking about throughout this podcast, that Tao sign includes death. It includes pain. You cannot be pro-life and pretend that death doesn't exist. It's the ultimate balancing of all living organisms. So we can no longer be black and white about right and wrong. We need to integrate the paradoxes of pain and pleasure, the darkness and the light. We need to understand that things are not simple. We're moving towards more complexity. And we need to be open to what is good for the whole, as opposed to just the individual. So I would like to end with just a couple of quotes, as we normally do, from some great thinkers. As we move from thinking that freedom is the only answer, but we need to include accountability now too. So when we think about the suffering of all sentient beings, that's another guiding principle, is how do we alleviate suffering? So we've given you a couple of simple principles, even if you are atheist, even if you are feeling you're in despair. We're giving values here that can be developed. And I want to now say that that's how we live in a dual world. But Jen and I have always said we're also in a non-dual world. So I want to end with that level of complexity. And this can be dangerous for thinkers who just want to be black and white. In duality, there's pain and pleasure. There is definitely right and wrong. And there are definitely things that we need to develop and things that we need to avoid. We have some non-dual thinkers, and this is a whole different level. We're now talking about the two truths. If you're a non-dual poet like Rumi, this is what you would dare to say. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, and I will meet you there. People go back and forth across the sill where the two worlds meet. The door is round and open, and don't go back to sleep. So he's suggesting there's a non-dual reality where right and wrong don't matter. And our friend Nietzsche, we spoke about Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that God is dead. Even he says that the next move is relational. He says, that which is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil. So, leaving you there with a few non-dual thinkers, which just throw some complexity into the need to be black and white as thinkers. Jen and I are always repeating that we need to open up to paradox. And that is where the transformative energy exists in integration. And that's where intelligence exists, is integrating information and applying it more and more specifically to our context. So we hope we weren't too complex here. We love to give you takeaways. Listen again if that was a lot of information. And we truly hope that you have a good couple of weeks. And Jen and I will be back again to support you in your own journey of transformation. Bye-bye. So thanks for joining us. And we hope you can take away some helpful tools, perhaps some great stories, and some wisdom for your own ongoing journey.
Join us for our next episode, where we will deep dive again into a universe of transformation.